Chapter 7. So, Foldar's dead. That's a relief. Douglas was pacing the floor of his office as he listened to Gillen's account of the attack on the convoy. Mind you, you took a big risk, swapping the money back to the smaller cart and sending it unprotected. Gillen made a dismissive gesture. Not really. I was confident that Foldar's informant would tell him the money was in the large wagon. Baron Douglas's eyes narrowed for a moment as he met Gillen's steady gaze. Then, as always, they slid away from direct contact. Yes, the informer. Any idea who that might be? Well, Gillen said deliberately, aside from you and me, only one other person knew that the money was supposed to be in the large wagon. Philip? Gillen nodded. Exactly. Now the Baron shook his head sadly. I never would have thought it. The man's been with me for years. Still, I suppose if the temptation is great enough, anyone can go bad. He sighed deeply, obviously finding the whole matter distasteful. I suppose we'd better have him in here then. If you would, Gillen said. They waited in silence for the few minutes it took for Philip to be summoned. The seneschal entered the Baron's office warily. He looked at the ranger and at the Baron. Of course, he knew about the events that had taken place earlier in the day. He was intelligent enough to sense that he was under suspicion as one of the few people who had known the intended whereabouts of the tax money. Why did you do it, Philip? The Baron began, his voice heavy with disappointment. My lord, Philip replied uncertainly. Thus far, he had been accused of nothing, although he knew that couldn't be too far off. Gillen held up a hand to stop the Baron saying more. If I may, Baron Douglas, he said, and the Baron signalled his acquiescence for Gillen to handle the questioning. He turned away, his hands clasped behind his back, a picture of betrayed trust. Philip, Gillen said quietly, what were you doing at Ambrose's house? The Baron swung quickly back to face them, a puzzled expression on his face. Philip's face showed surprise too, but there was no puzzlement there. He knew what Gillen was referring to. Ambrose, said Douglas. Who the devil is Ambrose? Ambrose is a wealthy merchant in the village, Gillen told him. Philip owed him money. The seneschal hung his head. You know about that, he said, his voice barely audible. The Baron now stepped forward, stopping only a metre or so from Philip, dominating the smaller man as he sat slumped, head down, unable to meet his Baron's gaze. So, you took money from Foldar to betray your fief, he said. To betray me? Philip looked up now, anguish and bewilderment on his face. Foldar, he said. I never took money from Foldar, my lord. I swear it. Then how did you pay your debts? The Baron demanded angrily, and again Philip's head sank. He opened his mouth to reply, but Gillen beat him to it. He stole it from the tax money already collected, he said, and both men looked at him in surprise. He what? The Baron asked, a second before Philip managed to reply. I never meant to keep it. I always intended to repay it, I swear, and I did repay it. I know, Gillen said. He looked now at the Baron. For the past few months, Philip has spent his nights working for Ambrose and some of the other merchants in the village. I watched him the other night when he came back from Ambrose's with a large sack of money. He put it in the treasury. It was in a rather distinctive white sack, and I saw it when I loaded the money onto the cart the other night. I wondered then, if a man was planning to help Foldar steal the tax money, why would he bother to replace money he'd already stolen? But what did he do for these merchants? The Baron asked, mystified. Again, Philip looked shamefaced. I was helping them with their accounts. Their record-keeping was very sloppy, and they were all paying far more tax than they were obliged to. I showed them how to reduce their taxes. They paid me for my services, and when I had earned enough, I replaced the money I'd borrowed from the treasury. He looked pleadingly at Gillen. It was all perfectly legal, I swear. Gillen hid a smile. Perhaps. Whether it was ethical is another matter. You could be said to have a conflict of interest, being the person responsible for collecting the tax in the first place. He turned back to the Baron. The fact is, my lord, Philip isn't our traitor. Then who is? Douglas asked. Gillen fixed him with an unblinking stare. After a few seconds, the Baron's eyes dropped. Then Gillen spoke quietly. You are, my lord. Me? Don't be ridiculous! All the bluster was back in the Baron's voice now. Why would I betray the fief and the kingdom to Foldar? The usual reasons, I suppose. Money probably figures among them, and I suspect that you were secretly in league with Foldar and Morgorath during the rebellion. Perhaps Foldar was threatening to expose that fact if you didn't help him. I'm sure it'll all come out at your trial. Ridiculous! Baron Douglas shouted, as if volume somehow equated with innocence. How could I be in league with Foldar? I've never even met the man. So you told me when I first arrived, Gillen said. And then the other day you said to me, those eyes of his are enough to send shivers down your spine. They're cold and lifeless like a snake's. A strange thing to say if you'd never met him. The Baron glanced desperately around the room, looking for a way to escape. His eyes fell on his dagger, lying on the desk, and he lunged for it. But Philip was quicker. He lunged forward as well, scooping up the heavy inkwell and throwing it, and its contents, into the Baron's face. Douglas staggered back, clawing at his eyes, trying to rub the heavy black ink out of them. You would have seen me hang for your crime, Philip shouted. The Baron finally cleared his eyes so that he had partial vision. He found himself staring down the length of Gillen's sword. The ranger smiled at him, but there was no real humour in the smile. We'll leave for Castle Araluen this afternoon, he said. I rather hope you try to escape on the way. This time, Douglas managed to hold Gillen's eyes. What he saw there made him quail. He decided then and there that there would be no escape attempt. Gillen took a pair of leather and wood thumb cuffs from an inner pocket and tossed them to Philip. Put these on him, would you? He asked. The seneschal nodded, then hesitated. Who'll be in charge here when he's gone? Gillen raised one eyebrow. For the moment, I suppose you will be. After that, we'll have to see. Just try to make sure the king gets some tax from this fief, would you? Philip nodded several times as he busied himself securing the Baron's hands behind his back with the cuffs. Of course, everything he's entitled to. Then he couldn't resist a slight smile. But no more. That's fair enough. Gillen resheathed his sword and took Douglas by the elbow, shoving him towards the door. As they went to exit, he looked back at the seneschal, who was kneeling to mop up the spilled ink on the office floor. I've heard that the pen is mightier than the sword, Gillen said. But I never knew the inkwell could be mightier than the dagger.